Dr. McKinney,
How you doing, Mr. Ficklin?
uh, the honest answer, you want the honest answer or the politically correct answer?
Give me the truth, man.
The truth and nothing, the truth and nothing truth. So help you God, right?
Right.
And I think that's what we're going to be discussing today, that's an ephemeral and contestable affirmation, regardless of who's even kind of writing the Old Testament or the New Testament or the Apocrypha or the Book of Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the Gospels that didn't make it into the top four.
Yep.
Um, so personally, not to talk about you, but my direct answer is that my obituary, I could write my obituary today and would be pretty pleased about it because you and I had what we know 500 people at least that are no longer on the planet in the last 10 years. So from that macro standpoint, I have no complaints.
Mm.
Uh, I was glad we could kind of chat today because I was feeling kind of down, and I realized that sometimes just engaging with folks kind of gets me out of my morass. So I didn't get to the press conference this morning that I had alluded to, but I'm really glad that you're available. How are you doing on this speck of Earth that revolves around the sun?
Well, man, I'm hanging in there, fighting the fight. You know, trying to uh get our people, all people, really thinking right.
Indeed,
Because
indeed.
if you're not thinking right, you don't behave right.
And we're gonna chat about this most recent personal challenge that you've been encountering, and I
Mhm.
think and I think not to be argumentative to you about getting persuading others, but I think you and I are just doing what we can do in terms of speaking our perception. We could say truth, but speaking our experience
Yeah.
and letting the chips fall where they may. So today's conversation is these chips are falling, and we know that the struggle continues, and there were always being watched one way or the other. The surveillance state, individually and institutionally, is certainly rampant. So you have been a columnist uh, for at least what the last 10 years, separate from your business development standpoint, but more recently, bring our listeners and viewers to bring them up to speed with this most recent salvo that you've been involved with, where you were speaking perceptions and truths and delineations about the global geopolitical morass in the Middle East, and the moral vacuum. And you've received some blowback. Is that correct?
That's right. But this is, as you probably know from your own experiences, this is not new. This has been happening for some time. And as you mentioned, I've been writing a column for really over 10 years. I started writing for the media, the mass media, back when I was at the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council up
Mm-hmm.
in Boston. And just, a little bit of an origin story of this activity. If you don't mind, I can.
Please, we have time. Sure,
Sure.
sure.
So, I've always been interested in editorial points of view. And it actually goes back to my childhood. My mom, who passed a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
when I was growing up, and we would get in the car, she would be driving with my brother and my older brother and my two younger sisters. We would have conversations uh, probably uncommon
Mm.
in Black households in the 1960s, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
because she would inform us about something that had happened that day. This is in Washington D.C. that may have been reported in the Washington Post, or at that time there was another newspaper. I used to actually deliver the newspaper. It was called the Washington Star.
Mm-hmm.
And so she would say something, and she would ask us, what do you think about it? And so, we probably hadn't thought much about it until she brought it up.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while, you got into the practice of, you know, doing your own analysis about what was going on at a fairly young age. And over time, as when I got to college and I went to school at UCLA back in the 70s, and that was a hotbed of political and social activity when I was there. I started UCLA in 1972. Baraka from who developed Kwanzaa was there at the time. Angela Davis was on campus at the time. There was an active, struggle going on between the Black Panthers on campus and us, another group that many of your listeners may have never heard of, but they can Google it. And they were sort of an alternative to the Panthers. So there was a lot of, activity. And during that time at UCLA, I began writing. We had a Black newspaper on campus that was called NOMO, NOMO, which in Swahili means the power of the word.
Yes.
And so I used to write for NOMO. And then my senior year, I became president of the Black Student Union. And so I had a column in the paper then. Tom, it's interesting because, fast forward a couple of years, I had an opportunity when I came to Yale in 1976, and then in 1978, I took a position at the White House at the Council of Economic Advisors, and I remember very distinctly when I was hired by the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House. You have an interview with the security because you're going to be coming into a very secured location. And one of the people I was talking that interviewed me said, you ought to have your file sealed. I said, why? He says, and they showed me, he says, we got all this information about you. You mentioned surveillance. So this is going back to 1978. They had records, they had copies of everything I had published. They had interviewed people that I was friends with and people I wasn't friends with. So the word, the NOMO, the power of the word, it's real. And so I've always respected the word and sharing, your thoughts in words with people who you may not know, but who may be interested in your point of view. So, so I've had a long, most of my adult life, I've been, thinking out loud.
Yes.
And writing about things. And so, there's been the recent editorials that I published in several publications, including the Hartford Courant and the New Haven Register and several other papers about the current struggle in Gaza, again, comes from an analysis, a historical analysis, which tells me that what's going on is wrong, and it is not sustainable, and is ultimately going to end badly for Israel. And so, that's a point of view in this country that I have been warned to stay away from.
Yes.
By people who love me, who tell me, says, hey, Fred, don't, this is before I even talked, I decided to write about it. They said, Fred, don't write about that because, it'll ruin you. And, and I thought about that. And Tom, this is the good thing about this stage of our lives. And I looked around and I said, you know what? I can write about what I want to write about without fear or favor, because quite frankly, I don't need anything that they offer. I don't. And I understand how fortunate I am to be in that position. But if you're in that position, and this is a message to other progressives that you can't fear the consequences of your thoughts if you believe in them.
That's right.
You have to, you have to fight the fight, and there will be consequences, but you have to, you have to share what you're thinking.
So bring us up to speed just in terms of this local salvo and
Yeah.
attempt of character assassination and legal assassination on your body, mind, spirit, and soul.
Yeah, so I was surprised recently. This was after we did our last interview. I was surprised to learn that a writer in the Hartford Current singled me out, but really attacked a friend of mine who essentially liked an editorial comment that I made in a LinkedIn post. And in that LinkedIn post, I basically said that the mainstream media is not covering Gaza as it should. And I singled out, I said the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, the darling of the left, all these organizations, and not to mention Fox or any of these other groups that call themselves news outlets, they were not covering Gaza. And we know that. They didn't even have people on the ground until a couple of weeks ago. And even when they were on the ground, like right now, they're traveling with the Israeli army. So what are they going to see, and what are they going to be able to report on? And so I've noted in my post that people, if they want to see what's going on, they need to look at Al Jazeera. Because Al Jazeera has boots on the ground in Gaza. And they've got photographers, they've got writers, they've got people documenting what's going on. And so if you want to know what's going on, watch that. You're not going to see it on MSNBC. You're not going to see it on CNN. You're not going to see it in the Washington Post. You're not going to see it in the New York Times. The supposedly record papers of record and news outlets of record are not showing this. And as a result, you're getting, political decisions that are not informed. Now, I know that the people at the State Department know what's going on. The people in the White House know what's going on. The people in the Defense Department know what's going on. But we're not getting the American people. If you just look at the newspapers and the news media, the mainstream media, you're not going to find out what's going on in that struggle.
So, but I think that in addition to just folks generally not necessarily vibing or agreeing with your hypothesis and postulations and fact sharing, but wasn't there a legal case that's original?
Yeah, now, I want to be clear. The legal, this goes to that. Like I said, I have a long history of this kind of stuff. The legal case was, and I found out about this because the FBI and the U.S. Postal Service police, they knocked on my door. And they came to my house and they said, we think you have been the subject of a threat. And I said, well, that I've got some letters to prove it. And they said, well, can we see the letters? And I said, sure. So I gave them letters that I had received from a reader. This goes back prior to the Gaza war. This was a different issue that got somebody upset. So I guess I have a penchant for getting people riled up. But in any case, this guy, local guy from Hamden, who had been convicted in the past of threatening President Obama, okay? he had written me a letter, several letters actually, and this was about the time of George Floyd, when I was writing about the policing in America, the condition of Black Americans, particularly in urban America, the role of the state in the treatment of Black Americans, the history of that, going back to slavery and Jim Crow and the civil rights era and affirmative action, and to today. So I was doing really historical analysis of the situation after George Floyd. He
Mhm.
reacted to that,
Mm.
basically saying that, people like me should be essentially eliminated.
Mm.
And so I shared those letters, those correspondences with the FBI, and they got back to me and said, yeah, this is the guy who wrote this is the guy who had threatened Obama
Mm.
and has threatened you, but he's also threatened some other people, and I don't know who those other people are.
Mhm.
And it was in violation of his previous conviction of threatening the president.
Mm. Mm.
And so he was rearrested.
Mm.
And this is a local guy.
Mhm.
He lives in our community.
Mhm.
And so I asked, I said, well, what does that mean? Where is he? And what does it mean he's arrested?
Right.
And they basically told me he's got an ankle bracelet on. But he's still kind of among us, but they say they know where he is at all times. So I've been as you know, there is a system in the U.S. just because this is a violation of federal law. You can't
Mm.
go around threatening people,
Mhm.
and you can't go around threatening writers. You can't go around threatening politicians with physical violence. And so I have I guess a new status, and that is of a victim.
Yes.
And so I get these emails from the Justice Department now informing me of the status of this case against
Mhm.
this local guy who threatened me and others. And what's kind of interesting, Tom, is uh this he was supposed to be, it's not a matter of his guilt or innocence. He's been determined to be guilty. This is a matter now of what is the appropriate sentence for him.
Mm. Mm.
And so I got emails from the Justice Department saying the case is in New Haven, at the federal court in New Haven, and he was supposed to be sentenced in September of 23. And so I got an email said, it's been postponed. He's going to be sentenced in October. October rolls around, I get another email. It's been postponed. He's going to be sentenced in November. November rolls around. Oh, it's going to be postponed. He's going to be sentenced in January. Now I got something not too long ago. I actually called the Justice Department to see what the status is, and they said, well, no, he's going to be sentenced now in April.
I see.
Now I wonder, I know the wheels of justice run slowly at times, but this seems a little strange that somebody
Indeed.
has been convicted and it's taking this long to sentence him.
Indeed. Indeed. That's something I'm going to look into. I noticed in November notice that you shared with me, and as you probably observed as well, that it was at that point assigned to Judge Victor Bolden.
Yes.
And so I'll reach out to Victor and maybe try to get an update or from his staff. But talk about irony of ironies. Uh,
No, he's he's in front of the wrong judge.
well, yeah. Let's it's January 24th, and next in a few days we'll
Yeah.
begin Black History Month, Negro History Week. I kind of like to refer to February as African Genesis Week, but obviously it's a 24/7, 365 endeavor. Take me back if you would to UCLA, because
Mhm.
you referenced Ron Karenga, and I do urge people to kind of research that, just that episode with us, the Black Panthers, Karinga, Angela. As you know, Erica Huggins is alive and well and thriving, and John Huggins, is from here, from New Haven.
Right.
So just that one little episode, when I say little, when people died,
Yeah.
and Karinga was convicted subsequently. But Kwanzaa has become so popular, and I
Right.
still am very ambivalent about celebrating it. But again, it's, do you condemn the messenger or do you look at the message? But
Right.
yeah, I urge people to kind of just Google Ron Karinga and Kwanzaa and how it kind of generated, because that tension between the disparity, if you will, between our visions and our wanting to see the glass to be half full versus it being half empty, and our internal struggles as a community are really profound. As you were talking, also, Dr. Fred, my mind went to David Walker.
Yep.
People 1828
Right.
uh, with his magnus opus, and he died under curious circumstances. So it seems to me that we've been trying to share the truth for a while. Um, Lastly, when you mentioned the surveillance society, just Beverly Cage has really a great book out on J. Edgar Hoover.
Mm-hmm. I
But
haven't seen that. What is it?
Beverly Cage, she's here at Yale, Gage. It's an autobiography on Hoover.
Mm-hmm.
It's a number of pages. She doesn't get into the sensationalism enough, but she really gives it more of a sociological kind of interpretation of his background, his lifestyle, his grooming, how that influences his decision. But there's enough there, and there's enough in other sources about that he kind of 1919 is when he got his start in terms of
Mm-hmm.
surveilling the black community. So the Cohen, what we call the COINTELPRO, really talk in terms of origin stories. It
Right.
really was before 1919 with slave catchers, but the
Yeah.
Beverly Cage book on Hoover is really fascinating. And yeah, I chat with people, guess in conclusion, when not conclusion for episode, but when people talk about, are we is our information being federally observed? I say, yeah, there's no, for a long time before Edward, before Snowden. I mean, this is just part of the routine. Uh, any thoughts about anything I guess
Yeah.
just
I
mentioned?
mean, that it brings back a lot of memories. This is living history for you and I. A lot of this is, and that's why it's good, I think, for us to talk about it so that, you know, younger folks who have to read about it can actually hear some firsthand stories about it.
Mm,
And I'll go back to UCLA and the Black Panther Party at that time was very active in Los Angeles, and uh, some of there was a major shooting that occurred. It was sort of a battle between us and the Black Panthers on campus, and the Panthers were active on campus,
mm-hmm,
and a couple of Panthers were shot. There was another Panther named Geronimo Pratt. I don't
mm-hmm,
know if you're familiar with that name,
mm-hmm,
but Geronimo Pratt was convicted wrongly of killing an LAPD cop, um, and he was sentenced to life in prison to San Quentin.
mm,
And so when I mentioned I was president of the Black Student Union in 1975, 76. I organized a trip to visit Geronimo Pratt
mm.
at San Quentin. So I went to San Quentin and met with him. And of course, he proclaimed his innocence, and it turned out that he was innocent.
That's right.
The FBI had to agree that he was innocent. And but he spent years in incarceration for a crime he didn't do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And he was finally let out, and he understandably left the United States and went to Tanzania, where not too long after he got there, he passed.
Yes, yes.
But brilliant man, a freedom fighter, who was wrongly convicted by J. Edgar Hoover and Ronald Reagan because
Mhm.
he was involved in this as well.
That's right. And I'm really glad you mentioned San Quentin as people listen, and just for them to kind of just say, well, what's the importance of San Quentin? Just kind of Google research, talk to people. But obviously George Jackson comes to mind, and you mentioned Angela Davis. I have a shirt on, can't really see all of it, but I guess just arrived the other day. Uh, but it has Medgar Evers on it, Joanne Chesmar is on it.
Mhm.
Malcolm is on it, Martin is on it, Megger's on it, Stokely, Kwame changed his name, and
Right.
it talks about all these people have FBI files.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
at the top it says my heroes have FBI files, and I'll be wearing it today this evening. That Ruby Bridges is speaking at Yale in honor of Martin Luther King Day at Yale, and I'm
Mhm.
going to wear it and I'll be wearing it for almost every other day. But folks do not realize or remember or even know that Jackie Robinson
Yep,
there was FBI file on Jackie before he even started with the Dodgers when he was in Montreal.
right,
So he was perceived to be a person of interest, let's say,
right.
in terms of threatening our domestic tranquility, even before joining the majors.
That's
And the FBI file, he was not accused of anything. It was just surveillance. But it's really fascinating how his efforts were documented, his travels, et cetera, as early as 1946, 47. Not to mention
right.
the military situation that he encountered
Yep,
as a lieutenant. Uh, so this this surveillance, whether we're in a surveillance society or Gestapo Part 20, and we know about the rise of fascism across the nation, across the world, not to mention what might happen in 2024 unless we get our act together. So yeah, this is you in a way. I know I can't speak for how you're disciplining yourself to have a, a, a normal day mentally, but given our background and the stony road we've been traveling, it is a challenge, but also it needs to be an exhilaration for what is the role of elders
right.
as we speak.
Absolutely. And again, a lot of this history is personal with me. Jonathan Jackson, George Jackson's younger brother, who worked with Angela Davis to try to free his brother, who was basically, this was three strikes and you're out type
Mhm.
laws that for a minor crime, George Jackson was looking at spending the rest of his life. I believe he was in Folsom. He may have been in San Quentin too, but um, Jonathan Jackson went to high school with me.
Mm, mm, mm,
Here's the other connection. Jackie Robinson went to the same high school I attended
mm.
and the same college. So Jackie Robinson, Jonathan Jackson went to John Muir High School in Pasadena, California.
Yes,
And that's where I graduated from high school.
yes. Mm,
So, there's all these really personal connections between the struggle then and today. And those personal histories affect how we view the world.
yes.
And that's not to say that we are saints. I'm not trying to tell anybody I'm a saint, but when we see behavior by people in power that are abusing that power, whether it's in Gaza or in Watts, Los Angeles, or in
Hmm.
New Haven, I think it's incumbent upon those who see it and have a voice to speak out and say, well, at least ask some questions.
Hmm.
What is going on here and why?
The I'm tempted, Dr. Fred, to ask about the election yesterday
Yeah.
in Bridgeport when you mentioned about abusing of power, but whether it's on the macro level or the the micro level, these are, and then trying to weave in when you mentioned about folks understanding this historical moment that we're in. But let me not go there. I'm not, but Ruby, as I mentioned, Ruby Bridges is in town this evening. And I think many people have seen the picture of young Ruby, what, 7 or 8 years old, kind of coming down the steps
Right.
with her briefcase and her
Right.
white socks and her
Classic.
church shoes and her dress of the proper length,
Yeah.
escorted by soldiers.
Right.
What does that say? I mean, in the 50s, where it wasn't that Ruby was trying to break into Fort Knox.
Right.
It wasn't that she was trying to steal the formula for Coke. It wasn't for Coca-Cola. It wasn't like she wanted to send threats to Faubus or whoever was the governor of Alabama at that time. What does that say about it? And obviously, we have fought in the so-called war for independence and the Civil War and other wars. What did it say in the 50s where a little young black child needs to be escorted to school?
Well, it says several things to me. It says that there are a lot of people in this country who view intelligent black people as threatening and view education as a tool that threatens power and ignorance. And there's that threat continue, that view of black people as being threatening is still true today. And to the extent that, and I think this goes into some of the blowback that I've gotten from some of my recent editorials, is there are a large number of people, I think, in fairly high places who think black people should stay in a particular lane. You can talk about black folks, you can talk about poor folks, but you're not supposed to talk about real societal structural issues that affect us directly or affect our power directly. And you're definitely not supposed to be chiming in on international issues. Stay out of that. And definitely don't be talking about, folks that you don't know, what you supposedly don't know about. And so, part of my writing now is to talk about those areas that are politically taboo for black folks to be opining about. And so, Ruby's, that picture that's kind of, it's burned into my head.
Yes.
I can see it.
Yes.
That is a picture that demonstrates the threat of black intelligence and black knowledge. And what's ashamed is it shouldn't be a threat.
Right.
We are not here to take anything away from you that is yours. But we are going to defend ourselves and demand what is right. But that doesn't mean that we're here to threaten you. We're not here to threaten anybody. So I'm glad she's here, and I wish I could join you tonight, but I know it's going to be wonderful for those college kids to hear her and her experience.
That's right. That's right. That's right. My mind went to Dr. Fred as you were chatting about people's various philosophies and the development of their perceptions and their beliefs and their desire to get ahead. My mind went to people often sometimes see Yale to be a bastion of liberal thought, but I think we often forget that Buckley kind of started at Yale. Then we forget that Bork kind of continued the torch. And and people forget that DeSantis had kind of an affiliation.
Absolutely.
So what we call the conservative movement, wherever you want to kind of think that it started, uh, these institutions certainly have played a role in that regard. You and I were talking about the role of Ivy League presidents just in general last time we spoke, not
Mhm.
knowing that Claudine Gay would be um, uh, crucified. And
Yeah,
so I wonder whether you would like to kind of comment about that. And also the president at Penn,
yeah,
uh, and Solovey here at Yale has done in my mind, a tremendous job of uh, defending the institution, but also talking about accountability,
right.
free speech. And I say a tremendous job in terms of there's been a volume of letters, of press conferences, of documents that he's shared with the internal and external community. But I just wonder whether if you had any thoughts about Claudine and powers that be, um,
Well, again, I think
and her
she's another
crucifix.
demonstration. Yeah, Tom, she's another demonstration of what is prescribed, that even Black intellectuals are allowed to talk about freely. Now, I think, um, you know, she was on a tightrope.
Mhm.
I think she was poorly advised when she went to Congress. I mean, she should have won. She should have known that that was going to be the nature of the conversation.
Mhm.
And I think she should have used that as an opportunity to explain what she meant by context.
Yes.
What was the context that she was concerned about? And in the context we're talking about here is the October 7th massacre
Mhm.
in Israel. And it was a horrible, terrible, despicable event. But there's always context. And she could have used that opportunity to educate the American people and the people in Congress.
That's
Because at
right.
that point, that by the time that she was there, and if she was going to take that position, the writing was already on the wall. She was gone.
Mm.
She was gone.
Mm.
And that's the reality again of censorship in America.
Mhm.
There's certain things you can't talk about. There's certain people you can't criticize without being viewed as some as outside of what's acceptable. And so, this was one of those things that even the president of Harvard is prohibited from talking about. But she should have talked about what she
Mhm.
meant by context.
Mhm.
And we'd be further along in this conversation than we are today.
I made a brief comment on Facebook. Sometimes I've just been trying to do some like teasers. So I mentioned Claudine Gay, um, uh, Anita Hill, and the lady from Harvard, the law school, Lonnie Grenier. So I mentioned Lonnie Gay and uh,
And Hill.
and Anita Hill, and
Yeah.
just put some marks. What's the connection between those three? Uh,
Yeah.
Folks will suggest that MLK was there are a variety of reasons that he was probably assassinated, state sanctioned assassinated, but people will suggest that his speaking out in terms of Vietnam was.
Absolutely. He was outside of the lane. And that's what I'm talking about. He's allowed to talk about civil rights and voting rights, but don't be messing with the military industrial complex. We got billions of dollars here at stake. We got billions of dollars right now at stake in Israel. People are getting rich in this country, blowing up innocent civilians in Gaza. And that's a reality. So, yes, you're absolutely right. You know, there was another thing that I've written about. I don't know if anybody's going to publish it, but I'll share it with you, Tom, because I think you'd appreciate it. And it goes, you had the election. I thought you were talking about the election yesterday, the election in Bridgeport. You also had the
I
election,
was, yeah,
the primary in New Hampshire.
yes.
and which the former president won by about 10 points over his primary opponent, Nikki Haley. And the week before the primary in New Hampshire, Nikki Haley was on CNN being interviewed by Jake Tapper, and Tapper asked Haley, "Is America a racist country?"
Mm-hmm.
And she flubbed it. If that were an oral exam, she would have flunked it in my class, her answer. And I wrote about this. I don't know if they're going to publish it, but basically what I say is that was an opportunity for her. And I'm not promoting her or heaven forbid anybody else in that party right now. But she had an opportunity to provide the context that we're talking about. And I don't think a lot of people, are aware of her personal history. That is really important, particularly when you're talking about a president. Where do you come from? Who are you? And what makes you special? And, for everybody, there's something that makes you special. Everybody. Now, in her case, her mother and father were born in India and are of the Sikh religion. And, many people confuse the Sikhs with Muslims. They're not.
Yes.
They wear turbans, but that's not Muslim, that's Sikh out of India. And they're very, it's different from Hinduism. It's different from Islam. And they are a minority religion in India. And they have experienced as a religious group a lot of discrimination in India and elsewhere. In fact, there is a case right now in Canada where the Indian government is being investigated by the Canadian government for assassinating a Sikh leader in Vancouver, Canada.
That's right.
Okay, so those are people that her father and mother grew up in that Sikh culture. A minority in India,
Yes.
a persecuted minority in North America. She could have talked about her father.
That's right.
She could have talked about her mother. She could have said they experienced a lot of things. That's why they left India. And also, her father, and I did a little homework on her father. Her father was a biology professor in South Carolina, working at and teaching at a historically Black college. Okay? That's where he worked. He was a professor at Voorhees College in, I believe it's Dalton, South Carolina. So come on. She could have said, this was my family. We moved from India. We experienced religious persecution and discrimination, and we came to this country and it was much better. But my father, did he want to work at that historically Black college? Or was that the only place that would hire a man with a turban on from a religion that nobody understood? Now, he came to this country at a time in the 1960s when the University of South Carolina, that state's premier school, had first admitted Black students in 1963. They didn't have Black students at the University of South Carolina until 1963. And they certainly didn't have Black professors at the University of South Carolina in 1963, or any Indian professors, I bet. I mean, I don't know that, but I'm willing to make a small wager that they didn't have any Indian professors with turbans on their heads at the University of South Carolina when Nikki Haley's father was applying for a job
That's
or
right.
looking for a job.
Yes.
And so you mean to tell me she doesn't know about racism and discrimination in America? Did her father, who was teaching black kids in South Carolina, who couldn't go to the University of South Carolina, but could go to this school, did he ever bring any black students home? Did he ever talk about his frustration in being able to get a job at the University of South Carolina instead of an underfunded historically black college? Did he ever complain about the facilities at the historically black college compared to what he was expecting in America?
Mm-hmm.
Did he ever complain about the wages that he was getting compared to other professors? I mean, it's unbelievable that she indicated ignorance on this.
And I mean, that's really profound. And she also had a interesting response to the question of the stimulus for the Civil War and
Yeah,
whether slavery was an instrumental factor.
to me, it was a disqualifying answer for the presidency of the United States. That's an easy question for a president to answer, given the other types of existential questions that a president is going to be confronted with when they take office.
Mm-hmm.
And if she can't handle that, she's in over her head.
I was looking at a clip this morning where you mentioned a bet, and I'm willing to wager people that Tim Scott will receive that he'll be selected by Trump for the VP because he's running hard for that position. It's somewhat scary, but he can be a convincing person given the audience that he's talking to.
Yeah, but Tim Scott is a whole nother issue. I mean,
Well,
it's
yeah.
go ahead.
I raise him because I raise the specter of him or Clarence Thomas or whoever that archetype
Yeah.
remains in our public discussion.
Mhm.
And it's January now. Some of us will pay attention on a regular basis between now and November. Others will tune out and maybe not ever tune back in. But and we've talked about media and the impact of your perception of reality and how it kind of inspire or depress you. But yeah, he's going to be on the media is going to be he'll be a player. He'll have some airtime,
Mhm.
and particularly if he gets a nomination. And I'm betting that he not that will be selected by Trump. I'm betting that he will be for a variety of reasons. Nikki, by the way, if I had to defend her, this might surprise you. She talked about states' rights
Mhm.
trumping the economic realities of slavery. I've read from time to time, as many people know, when the southern states succeeded, they wrote a document. Each state wrote a document about why they're succeeding. And again, I think you'll agree. In the beginning, the agreement was slavery is okay. Each state would decide whether we want slavery or not. That was the bargain. That
Right.
was that was the constitutional agreement. That was the 3/5 clause. So when she mentioned states' rights, yeah, from her standpoint, this South Carolina had every right to remain a slave-holding state for as long as it wanted to. And then obviously Strom Thurmond is a fascinating character in terms of South Carolina, and I like to raise his name up for people to kind of
Yeah.
not to kind of salute how long he lived. I think it was like 100 or so, and not to talk about his liking chocolate women, which later became
Yep.
revealed. But the fact that he was able to change parties,
Mhm.
and in 1948 that he actually had a token run for president. So as we talk about Trump today, but just remember as late as 1948, after fighting this war, World War II, where so many of us died, still you had segregationists feel that they could kind of had to reclaim their space.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a this is a struggle it's the original sin of America,
Mm,
slavery, and we have never we still have not come to terms with it.
That's right.
And, you know, we've had several opportunities to come to terms with it, but we refuse to, because there, again, is one of those issues. I think, you know, and I look back at the guy that threatened me, he really didn't like one of my pieces on reparations.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was an opportunity. We had several opportunities right after the Civil War, as you know. At the Sherman March to the Sea, he was in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
He ended his march from the Mississippi to the Atlantic, which really effectively ended the Civil War militarily.
Yes.
He met with blacks in South Carolina, and, you know, to his credit, he asked them, well, what do you want? And it was unanimous. The blacks that he met with, these were, you know, former enslaved people, said, we want land.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we want. And Sherman was prepared to give it to him.
Yes.
And he was prepared to take it from the people who claimed to have owned those Africans.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that would have been justice. to give the blacks who worked that land without compensation, that land back to them.
Mm-hmm. Sure, the 40 acres and the mule, right?
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And there was enough of it. There was enough of it there that they could have made good on the wrong that they had done. But now you see people are saying, well, reparations won't work because, you know, who really was a descendant, who wasn't a descendant. We know who the descendants were.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is, no, they don't want to give it up. They don't want to compensate black folks.
Let's as we kind of conclude, Dr. Frey, let's go down the rabbit hole again in terms of the Middle East situation, because, you know, land, partitions,
Yeah.
economic oppression, that these historical themes. You're an economist and a columnist, and you've studied mankind's. When I say evolution, I'm not saying evolution meaning that it's
Getting better.
Getting better, but just the various iterations of our dealing with these issues about freedom and justice, be it indentured servants or serfs, or we don't hear the word serf anymore. We don't hear the word peasant anymore. But we've had these words throughout history that talk about caste system. You referenced caste in a way with Nikki Haley. Uh, what kind of still bewilders me, in terms of the Middle East problem, is what do you think? What do you think the Hamas wanted to achieve by the assault? The only thing I can come up with is that it was inspired by Israel. I can explain that later, but I can't see what what do you think they expected to happen after the October 7th massacre? Terms of blowback and Israeli military response.
Yeah.
And and just lastly, these tunnels have been built for what, the last 10, 15 years?
Right.
So I'm curious what the media. I haven't heard anything in the media, be it Al Jazeera or CNN or anybody, about what they if the head of a Hamas came out today and said, we want this for, so rather than from the sea to the river to sea, that's kind of gets a metaphor. I mean, they really don't expect, I don't think, that to happen. But let me just
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I've speculated on what it is their objective was from October 7th. I don't think that it's explainable using just sort of traditional analysis, but I do think there were several things taking place prior to October 7th that were of great concern to Hamas. There's been much talked about rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia,
Yes.
and that they were prepared to make a deal of recognition, Saudis recognizing Israel. And when you are an oppressed people and you are, we haven't seen this kind of oppression in a long time,
Right.
where you've got, 2 million Palestinians, squeezed into a very small landmass that is totally controlled by the Israelis. What gets in, what gets out, etc. And the people in that plot of land used to own land, used to own farms, used to govern themselves, used to have the freedom of mobility, used to be able to they had a country, and it's been taken from them. You are going to be pushed to the point where you're going to do things that you wouldn't normally do if you weren't in that condition. That's the context that that President Gay didn't get into, is what would cause somebody to essentially murder another human being. And I think that's the question. And if you start unraveling that and looking at it clearly, you will uncover that there's a serious wrong taking place here. Let's look at this. You can't steal people's land and expect them just to take it. And, my biggest fear, Tom, right now is that, we've added to this cycle of violence, this act by Israel on Gaza. This is not in their interest. This is not in the Israelis' interest to commit essentially mass murder and genocide, as the South Africans have accused. And
there's no question in my mind that the Israeli government has lost the public relations war.
Oh, absolutely.
And that, lost a few weeks ago. So where, as MLK would say, where do we go from, where do we go from here? And I thought you were going to say about the possibility of the World War III. I think there may not be a global World War III, but I think there certainly could be an expansion of territories that would be under military combat, as we see already.
Right.
And people don't reference the Congo as much anymore, although problems are going on there, and
Sudan.
And Sudan and the South China Sea. So there are going to be pockets, and not to mention Venezuela. There's going to be pockets, and even Brazil for that matter, and definitely Argentina. So looking at the geopolitics of everything and America's role, that's where the media still has not risen to the challenge. I'm hoping there might be just a small show on one of the major networks about the Monroe Doctrine, about the War of 1812, from the shores of Tripoli. I mean, even back then you had not to mention Grenada and et cetera. So American foreign policy will be discussed for this upcoming election, but it's not going to be as cogent or as coherent about how we gotten to this place. So any closing thoughts? We still want to remain somewhat, see the glass to be somewhat half full.
Exactly. So it's half full. And I just think that, you're seeing what's encouraging to me is that you're seeing people across the globe begin to share their understanding of right and wrong, and to be clear about it.
Yes.
And this isn't the first example of this sort of global moment. You had it also to a certain extent after George Floyd. you know, there were protests around the world that Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, forced the realization of it. It made people confront the reality.
That's right.
And now we have a situation where, and this is what scares, I think, the bejesus out of global powers. Because as people begin to ask questions about the behavior of governments, you know, we consider governments to be legitimate representatives of the people. But what happens when those governments begin to do things that oppress people systematically?
Mm-hmm.
Are those governments, are they functioning as they should? And so, you know, we've been through these types of seismic political shifts in our history, and you mentioned several of them. But I believe that there's a groundswell taking place across the globe of people who want justice, social justice,
Mm-hmm.
and are looking at the systems that we, in some cases, accept as reality and stuck in stone. Well, those systems, in my words of my Rastafarian friends, Babylon is falling, man.
But you have the One Love Bob
Still
Marley
Bob
post.
Marley back. Bob would say Babylon is falling.
And then even if that's the case, what will rise up? Whether there'll be a coalition of other players or just or a dominant one. I like the joking kid with folks. Not really joking kid, but if you lived in Colombia one day and the next day you're living in Panama. So people forget
Yeah,
to see even the creation
exactly.
of the country. We,
That's
we, we,
right.
were, we were instrumental in creating a country. And I say that in the sense of resolving this Middle East situation.
Yep.
We can rename it. We can rebrand it. No, Rhodesia doesn't have to remain Rhodesia for the rest of its life. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're not stuck.
just to
And
keep.
there's just one more Rastafarian thought. This was told to me recently by a friend who's a Rasta. And he said, if you don't live in peace, you will rest in peace.
Mm, 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 mm,
And that's profound.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, you know, this is really about, you know, peace.
Excellent.
So,
Excellent. Excellent.
thank you, brother.
Dr. Fred, thank you and one love to the infinite degree.
Yes, man.
All
So,
right. Peace.
okay. Peace.